Tracy, do you want to say anything first?
I might give a few upcoming events at the end, but I just want to welcome
Okay.
everybody. I'm founder and executive director of Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. We're a passionate group of educators mentoring and learning together, bringing mindfulness and yoga into classrooms in so many ways. And we're going to learn new ways tonight.
So I'm just going to go ahead and start and just say hello, everybody. My name is Barnaby Spring. I'm one of the people who was fortunate to be involved with the very beginnings of the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully, an international organization that's bringing supports and resources to educators in private and public education all over the world, but mostly predominantly in the United States. Around what this is, this mindfulness, what is it all about, and helping us all together to understand. I am approaching an exit date look, there's my friend Jane Marie shaking her head. She's a principal in the DOE. I'm currently an acting principal in the New York City Department of Education, but I get to go off and do a whole bunch of things on February 17th. And so the plane is in the runway. So I need a lot of mindfulness practice right now. And what this is this is a series of talks. It's called the Praxis series 2022-23. And once a month, we are having conversations, and I was invited by Tracy to sort of curate these or find the people to participate in these conversations, and we are recording them, and they're going to be part of a class. We'll come back to it, and we'll see what wants to be. I know that there's some interest in coming back and looking at this as possibly a university course. But just so you know, this is the fourth installment. The first installment, we were focused on mindfulness in relationship to things like improvisation and innovation, the idea of we're being and living in times where we really need to be able to think and reflect on our feet. And we focused on the wonderful concert, the Cologne concert that Keith Jarrett managed to pull off. And that was the first conversation. The next conversation was with the writer, James Hart, and his memoir, Lucky Jim, which was a very powerful focus on how does storytelling and help us to develop a sense of mindfulness. And I'll talk about mindfulness and what we mean by that in relationship to stories that transform our lives. The third installment was with Susan Wubsey, a therapist, a family marriage therapist, but also a guide for the organization called Wilderness Quest, where you take groups of people out into the natural world, the backcountry, no frills. And she spoke to us on mindfulness in the natural world. Now, what do we mean by mindfulness? The term that we're using for this series, and that is pretty much what inspired me as an educator and as a principal and as a citywide administrator to bring mindfulness into public education, was given to us by John Kabat-Zinn through work that he did as a doctor, developing a model of mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he defines mindfulness as paying attention on purpose in a particular way to what arises in the present moment without judging. So some of you may be familiar with meditation and yoga, and this is some fact in some schools of meditation, mindfulness is a meditation practice, highly regarded, but this is a secular, non-sectarian approach to mindfulness that is really sort of zeroing in on giving young people, particularly people in urban settings, but all children really in our world today, strategies for self-regulation, strategies for managing anxiety, strategies for managing stress and fear, and not only for self-regulation, but also for developing critical thinking skills and emotional self-awareness. And this is really something that is just, I don't know what the word is. I say emerging in accordance with its being, but as so many different things structurally begin to happen in our world that are creating a great deal of stress for young people and really for all of us. I don't need to go into specifics, but we're all living in the same world. We see the news. We know that these are difficult times. This work is really taking off. But what does it mean to take mindfulness away and off into the world to solve big problems? This was the series that I wanted to create with Tracy and with you. And I would ask you, participants who are here this evening, use the chat to ask questions or to even give an observation. We want this to be interactive, but right now we're sort of in the phase of also discovering what the material wants to be. We're sort of discovering the very curriculum for this course in the process of having these conversations. Tonight we have Stephen Ritz with us. Stephen has written a book called The Power of a Plant, which really tells the story of his experiences as a teacher in the New York City Department of Education. And it's phenomenal. We're going to let Stephen tell that story because nobody tells it like Stephen does. And then he went on to create something that I still can't get my mind around in terms of the implications of this work, something called the Green Bronx Machine, where he has generated and is generating an international focus on what it means when children come to school to grow their own vegetables in a classroom, and in the process, learn how to care for themselves and one another through social emotional learning skills, learn about science, learn about literature. It's a holistic approach grounded in tackling a very serious issue in our world today, healthy eating. Again, nobody makes the argument like Stephen does. So also, we want to introduce and lift up the Sustainable Development Goals this evening, and we'll put links in the chat and you can circle back. You can write down the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 critical goals articulated by the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, headed by Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Sachs, a world-renowned economist, helping us to think about the real challenges that we need to face today. And you can Google it before the end of the night to find out about it. So, praxis, action and reflection directed at structures to be transformed. Things that need to change, structures in our world, systems, processes, procedures, our institutions. And this is a definition that comes to us from Paulo Freire, a great educator, who wrote that it's through praxis that oppressed people can acquire critical awareness of their own condition, the human condition, and that with teacher students and student teachers engage in an effective and sustainable struggle for liberation. Liberation, not just from the bondage of oppression, but liberation from the bondage of challenges and problems that can also put us into bondage if we don't come to terms with them. So that's this. We're going to take a little moment to practice a little mindfulness, and then I'm going to bring us to Stephen Ritz, who's going to take us on a voyage. But for now, I'd like to invite everybody who's here this evening or listening to this at any time, really, to just let's pause. We're just going to pause. And I would invite you just to take a nice relaxed seat in the midst of this life that we are all living together, no matter who we are, no matter where we come from, no matter what's going on in our world, we can pause. We can have a nice relaxed seat. I could invite you, and I do invite you to have this sense of your feet connected to the ground, some sense of a grounding connection to the earth. And just relax in that. and a sense of the spine extending up from the seat, not in a kind of slouched back, even though we might be slouched and ready to go to sleep. It is nighttime, and not in a kind of forced militaristic style, but as if there's a string gently lifting us up and extending the spine up towards the ceiling, so that our feet are connected to the earth, and yet at the top of our spine is our head that's connecting us to the sky. So we're sort of sitting like a mountain, earth below, sky above, human being here in the middle. Just invite you to relax into that. I always say to students when I've taught mindfulness, this is not about sit still and be quiet. It's more about allow stillness to be. You can just allow stillness to be. And you can allow the silence to be. So it's about allowing. In that stillness and silence, you might notice sounds. You might notice sounds in the room or on the street. You might feel feelings. Maybe you came with a feeling this evening. Maybe something I've already said has sparked a feeling, so you notice the feeling. And here's the thing that I would invite you to do, we can do it just for a little bit, is we can focus on the breath. One thing that we're all doing, that we all have in common, is that we breathe. We're breathing. No big deal, and yet fairly profound, this idea of breathing in and breathing out. Simply focusing our attention on the fact that we are inhaling and exhaling. And while we're doing that, we notice thoughts come, we notice thoughts go. We notice feelings come, we notice feelings go. And we notice physical sensations come, heat, cold, tightness, and we notice that it goes. So let's just sit here together. I would invite you to just join me in noticing the breath, just for a few breaths. And then you could wiggle your toes. Could look around. When we do this with the little ones, sometimes we say, breathing in, I calm myself. Breathing out, I smile. A great teacher of mindfulness gave us that one. And so welcome. And now I'd like to ask you, Mr. Stephen Ritz, to, hearkening back to the overall theme of our series, what's really going on here? What's going on here with you, Mr. Ritz? Tell us your story.
Well, thank you, Barnaby, and greetings, everybody. You know, I will share, you've touched on so many things that give me a lens of entry, as this is an unscripted conversation, but
Right.
You know, talking about the mountains in the sky. So for those of you who are tuning in, we are in the middle of public housing. I'm in a 110-year-old building in the middle of the South Bronx, known as CS55, one of the oldest standing school buildings still in New York City history. And we're in the midst of the largest public housing project in the poorest congressional district in America, in the poorest performing school district, in the least healthy county in all of New York State. So it's a great place to start. But interestingly enough, you know, when Barnaby talked about be the mountain between the sky and the earth, this classroom is painted green. We are 4 stories up at a custom classroom, and the classroom is painted green and blue because it is the colors indigenous of Native American culture, where both colors are actually the same. It's where the earth meets the sea or the sun meets the horizon. And in Native American culture, blue and green are actually the same color, just a different shade, and it's where you position yourself in it. And, remarkably, this room is painted green. It's the only green room in the building. People love it. Children call it a sanctuary. So it's an interesting place to be. And then thinking about, the quote that, Barnaby was talking about, this is a community that is desperately and obviously under-resourced on so many levels. But not only are we under-resourced, we are over-extracted. The deck is almost stacked here long before the cards are dealt. And, for decades and generations, we've tried to end the war on poverty here, only to see us that much further entrenched in it. And the gap between the rich and the poor and the healthy and unhealthy become so much greater. So I guess I'm just an insurgent educator. I'm definitely president of the Barnaby Spring fan club. And, our commitment to mindfulness in a larger system, our commitment, and I know Barnaby's getting ready to retire and the kids don't want him to leave. Who wouldn't want a principal like Barnaby? But, it's that commitment to kids, that children, that people should not have to leave their neighborhood to live, learn, and earn in a better one that drives me to do the work that I do. And it starts with a couple of things. And I'm really here to kind of blow up my own spot because it's the work that I do. People give me a lot more credit than I deserve. And, the most important thing that I do is I show up daily. And, for those of you who are out there, showing up is very powerful. We could go into student data and student studies and all of this kind of talk, but the data indicates that children who have access to one kind, caring adult in life will succeed. And I personally am just determined to be that kind, caring adult for as many children and colleagues as possible. And that's my big mission, to move from a purpose mindset, if you will. I mean, from actually a transactional mindset of, trading money for time or this or that, as a place where I have purpose, where we have meaning. So, any teacher can paint their classroom green. So if you have some paint, please do paint your classroom, and anybody can put in some cool technology. And, the interesting thing is most of the technology, we grow a copious amount of food here in the middle of public housing, 4 stories up. But really what we really do is grow love. And, that's what is at the hand of this. Children come in here and they can be anything. And that's really the most important thing to me, is that you can come here and be anything. Now, the work that we do is definitely rooted in food for so many reasons, and we can get into that. But there are a couple of basic underlying principles. And those principles are working together in concert with equal respect for staff and students and value contributions. I really believe in the collective, in the we. It's also that important, no matter what school, no matter what institution or organization you live in, that we practice self-care. So we understand how to take care of ourselves, take care of each other, and take care of the planet. That not only that we speak, but we listen. I do a lot of public speaking, but really I've become an adept public listener. So it's important that we listen and learn from each other. And we assume, in a world where we're so quick to point fingers and judge, and we all know the kind of world that we live in, that we assume a positive intent, that we suspend judgment and kind of live in the moment, that we communicate honestly, we seek to collaborate and not control others, we seek to see the best in each other, we're conscious of words and actions, we use our power for the common good, and we appreciate our environment. So, for me, growing food in a community that has limited means and limited access to that food really encompasses all of the above. And a long time, I have a lot of fun growing food. So I've got a garden in the classroom, I've got a kitchen in the classroom, I've got a classroom in the classroom, and I'm a full-time volunteer.
He's literally in the classroom at work right now.
I kind of live here, and this has become my lifelong mission, to move children from transaction to purpose.
All right, Steve, I want to throw something in. So I wanted to give everybody a little dose of Stephen Ritz in the night. Nobody's going to sleep with this energy. We're going to be up all night. Here's what we know about you. You've won so many different awards for your teaching. You travel around the world telling the story of how you had the idea of bringing a phenomenal experience into the lives of children that has blossomed into this massive thing called the Green Bronx Machine. But can you take us back to how this all began in terms of what was the idea? Can you tell us briefly how give us a little bit of a timeline in terms of how this began for you?
So, I always say being brief is tough, but I'll do my best. So let me be clear. I'm an accidental success, and I've kind of achieved success by simply putting one foot in front of the other. So I have no science background, no agricultural background. I started teaching, I shared with you earlier in the early 1980s when the Bronx was literally burnt to a crisp. I took a job at a public school that was the only standing building in an 8-square-block radius. Simply because I was qualified. And how was I qualified? I passed the test. Go figure. I had no teaching background. I had played college basketball. I was asked to graduate elsewhere several times, but because I was able to pass the test, people thought, okay, we can put them in front of kids, especially in front of during a tremendous teaching crisis. But what I found instantly, aside from being a better athlete than most of those children at that time, little props to myself, was that I really had the ability to make kids feel valued, that, you could coalesce children around amazing things. And that amazing thing was really their environment and their lives. And in a world where so much, and particularly in marginalized and low status communities, where everything is transactional, if you give kids some passion, purpose, and hope, amazing things will happen. So, it's very funny, Barnaby. You talk about I travel around the world, and I do. And I'm in a lot of third world countries, and I've got my big computer bag and my bag of props that, kids really get a kick out of, whether it's my big magnifying glass. I'm a badass man. I carry a magnifying glass. I carry a horn to get people's attention, the two typical teacher props. But the number one question that I always get when passing through customs is, sir, in that backpack, do you have any weapons? And I'm like, of course I do. Passion, purpose, and hope. Those are my weapons. And, and I come and I wield them dutifully. Yeah, I've got weapons. I've got my mind. I've got, I'm here with a purpose. So, yeah, I'm armed, dangerous, and ready. Now, do I have anything that's really going to hurt anybody? No, but I'm here to be disruptive. And that's really what this work is about. The work is about fighting for children who were born in places that most people would not want to be caught dead in. The work is about fighting for children whose monsters are real, who don't have a bedroom to call their own, who don't always get dinner. The work is really about, and equally on the other side, the work is about children of privilege who have the ability to take that privilege and create great opportunities for public service that can really change the world. So there's a lot that I do, but the whole
Let me
thing
ask you a question.
accident.
I want to give the folks who are listening, what does it look like? What happens in the typical day of a student who walks into your classroom? What happens?
That's easy. They're going to be loved until they learn to love themselves. And along the way, they're going to get a whole bunch of reading, writing, math, and rules. Listen, this is not chaos here, but we have created a place that children love to be in. We recently did a film with the New York City Mayor Eric Adams, and I was concerned because they really focused in on a lot of the violence and the realities of our community. I'm like, oh, that's not what the story I want to tell. But every child calls this classroom a sanctuary. It's their favorite place in the Bronx. And whether they're growing vegetables, feeding the fish, or coming in here to fail and put their head down and take a nap, or ask for some questions, or cook a meal, it's amazing. And, here we are in New York City, possibly and arguably the culinary capital of the world. And, you can get any food you want in New York City. And here in the South Bronx, we're limited with food options, but there are 10,000 cheap options. Kids don't need to come to me for food. They can get crap anywhere, and crap being calorie rich and processed food. We've got the clown, the king, the colonel, just waiting on every single corner. But in a city where you can get the best meal you want delivered. We've got Uber, DoorDash, Fresh Direct, everything delivering. The best meal that I've ever had is one that's created and grown right here with kids, where we sit
How
around.
do you grow this food in your classroom?
So we grow a copious amount of food using this amazing technology called the Tower Garden. Right now, we're growing bok choy, tomatoes, scallions. We're growing flowers. I've got a strawberry farm on the other side of the room. And, that in and of itself is an amazing thing, because in a world where children are so disconnected from nature, when you teach children about nature, you teach them to nurture. And when you teach children about nature and nurture, we as a society collectively embrace our better nature. But how it all started is interesting, because I come from a couple of different crises in my life. One being, I'm a slim 185 and looking very sexy at an advanced age now. But, in 1984, I had a 45-inch jump. I was aspiring to play in the NBA. The Knicks had a different idea, and I have since forgiven them and still remain available. But, they haven't gotten their mindful practice yet. So I keep putting it out there that I'm available. But along the way, I got very hungry. And I went from 185 to 205 to 245 to 285 to 335. I went from having a 45-inch jump to a 54-inch waist, and having a heart attack in school in front of my daughter. So my own health crises spawned by simply eating what was available in my community was mind-numbing. Hence the hat and the Nomer, the big cheese. I was literally the big cheese, wandering school every day with a 44-ounce soda and a pizza pie, because that's how I made peace with kids in school, because food is love. Now, remarkably, at the turn of the millennium, I had some tragedy. My wife and I had some terrible tragedy in our life. We lost a child, and we were devastated, and I wound up just having to switch job locations to be closer to home. We wanted to circle the wagons, so to speak, around each other. And I went into what, for those of you who are in the DOE, called an open market transfer. And I simply picked the job that was closest to my home so I could walk to work. So
at this time, you were a teacher in the DOE.
I had been teaching for years. I had been a nutty teacher doing amazing things. I had an animal. I had 2,500 gallons of fish tanks in one classroom. I had a 22-foot living python in a classroom. I had 4-foot iguanas that lived in my classroom. So I had always been doing nutty things around connecting kids. I had been taking kids on these massive bike tours. We were the first students to travel the New York City subway system on one token without ever leaving the system, and created math algorithms for the fastest way to hit every single subway stop in New York City without ever leaving the system, which was kind of cool. I mean, I was known for doing fun stuff. I was that guy. I was also that guy that if I wasn't loved by the principal, was often on the other side of the desk, with a letter to file and a union rep.
I'm watching Jane Marie Kapitanakis's face. She's an elementary school principal. I'm gauging her. I'm watching her. Yeah, this is the thing. This is the thing. You have an innovative, out of the box, highly energetic, passionate teacher. And, how did that work out?
Well, for me, it's worked out just fine. Ask some supervisors who have gotten fired. I'm sure they might think differently. Ask some of the principals, who I spoke out about when I saw them not doing what I think is in the best interest of children. They might think differently. But, I'm here today. I'm well adjusted. I'm very happy. And, most importantly, 2,200 living wage jobs later in this community, this humble little organization is partnered towards.
So you're referencing the Green Bronx Machine. How did the Green Bronx Machine come about? Because I think it's important for folks to realize that you had to leave the system as a teacher to create something that the system is embracing.
Well, the system is interesting. The system is much better now than it's ever been. So, I want to give props to where it's deserved. I think we are all on the evolutionary chart of man. My goal in life is to hopefully walk upright without my knuckles scraping the ground as I continue to labor on. But, literally, Green Bronx Machine started. I took this job at Walton High School in 2004 after a tragedy in my life. And literally, I walked into a school. No one knew me. I didn't know the staff. It was the largest high school in the Bronx and the most dysfunctional high school in the Bronx. It had a 17% graduation rate. It was at 394% capacity. We had 18 armed police officers, 48 school safety agents, and a police precinct in the school. So imagine, we had 256 felonies in the building in my first year. So I went from being hired as a science teacher, and they walked in, they said, do you know anything about science? And I said, I took it in high school. The first thing I thought of was, I'll date myself. I thought of Thomas Dolby, blinded me with science. Like, science? No, I know nothing about science, really. They're like, can you read? And I'm like, yes. They're great, you'll be a science teacher. I'm like, okay, great. Who am I teaching? And they wound up, this was the year that Mayor Bloomberg started breaking up schools and bringing kids out of Rikers Island into the large schools to kind of intimidate teachers so that the large breakup of schools would be more easily digested. So I had 17 kids out of Rikers Island in a classroom ready to learn science. And I was like, as the kids would say, WTF, what are we gonna do? So the first thing that I really wanted to do is build some community. I was with 17 kids who are equally as big, equally as strong, and equally as energetic as me. So that's either the requiem for success or quick disaster. A lot of them had baggage, whether it was homelessness, probation, substance abuse. Many had children of their own. So I figured the first thing to do is really build community. How do we decide that, in a system that is really designed not to serve these kids, how do we work to do something great? And similarly, how do I keep a job? Because at the end of the day, I know the principal is going to come in and do an observation. So the first thing I do is I get on my trusty AOL account and I download every email address that I have. And I send out a help request. I'm like, SOS, I'm teaching science. What should I do? Send me a microscope, a telescope, an experiment. What do I know about science? Absolutely nothing. And I got no response. And about 2 weeks into school, I'm sitting and we're doing this whole thing, talking about why we see plants growing in crazy places, just having some conversations with kids and trying to understand where they're at. And interestingly enough, also dealing with issues around hunger. And there's an announcement on Mr. Ritz, come to the office, please. Come to the principal's office. And the kids are like, oh, they were upset, but they're like, this is going to be big. Either Ritz got something good or Ritz got fired. So I walk out of there, I kind of half-heartedly into the principal's office. And number one, they tell me they're going to make me the dean of school because I knew every single kid in school. So there were kids who literally were dragged out of school every day in handcuffs. And on their way out, they would ask to come by my class to say hello, to ask how my wife was doing, to ask how my daughter was doing. And the principal and staff were smart enough to realize that here's a guy who knows 3,400 kids by first names because I've been teaching them elementary school and middle school for years. So I was a bright spot in their lives, from a life prior at a very dismal time in their life.
Okay, I want to intersect something now. Hold that. Remember where you're at, because this is where you and I became brothers from other mothers. When we met some years ago and started telling each other our stories, I came into the DOE to work with kids in Rikers Island based on an idea that I had right around the time that you were doing this work, right where you are. I think we actually sort of became deans of students right around the same time. And I became dean of students in a transfer high school. And it was the same dynamic. And a lot of these kids had one foot in the system and one foot out. And there was something that, I was coming in there based on a kind of sense of crisis, a sense of needing to be of service, a sense of what am I all about? And, the principal saying, I want you to be the dean of students. You're very good at working with the kids. And I said, well, what do you mean working with the kids? You mean like keeping them calm when you want me to walk them out of the school? I don't want to be that kind of a dean of students. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll be the dean of students if you let me start a yoga and mindfulness program. And at the time, the principal said, you'll never be able to, nobody will let you do that. And Joel Klein was the chancellor of the DOE at the time. And I sent him an email right on the spot. He was famous for responding to these emails. And I said, if I start a yoga class, tell me right now, am I going to get fired? And he said, absolutely not. I love it. And I showed it to the principal. And it's that same kind of thing where, you're walking, you're daring to care, you're daring to be innovative. You're not going to get a prize for it. In fact, you might get slapped. You're going to be a principal's headache. That principal let me start the yoga and mindfulness, but she felt I had gone over her head. And I said, but you were afraid. I had to make sure that you wouldn't be, that this was good. It's like this dynamic that you have, Stephen, in your life is very important to me. And I think it's very important for all of us. What is it going to take to begin to be innovative? We have a chancellor right now in New York City who's encouraging us to reimagine education, to reimagine schools. I want to ask you, where in the midst of all this activity did this idea, where was your mindfulness in all of this? Because, you would not have been able to do this if this were just mindless, activity. You wouldn't have survived. And I guess here you are about to begin to really have this idea. What are you doing for yourself, Stephen, to cultivate this sense of critical awareness? Because that's probably, for me, that's one of the foundational benefits of mindfulness. We know from Jane Marie is here tonight, from her work as an elementary school principal all the way up to the adults, is that one of the things that mindfulness does for all of us is it helps us just become more aware of what's really going on here. So where is that for you in terms of the power of a plant?
Well, number one, first of all, I eat much better, and eating better. You wouldn't put vinegar in your Porsche. So, why should I put poison in my body? So eating better has become very important. And literally, I've eaten my way to good health, which is rather remarkable. But I tend to have two speeds, fast and faster. But the speed that I
right. So my question is where does mindfulness happen for you?
I'm going to answer you. The speed that I really operate best on is the speed of trust. And trust is earned. It's about building these rich relationships. And again, that brings me back to this whole notion of purpose. I'm not here for a transaction. They're far better teachers than I am. If you want to talk about Fontes and Pinnell, let's hang up now and I can tell you who you need to speak to. If you want to talk to me about teaching kids how to factor binomials and polynomials, I can do that. But I know people who are far better. But if you want to talk to me about building trusting relationships with children and families and community members and valuing the lived experience of a community or of people I serve, I'm your guy. So, along the way, I've learned to speak quickly because, you get those 30 seconds, you get those 10-second elevator pitches. But what I've really learned to do is listen. And when I learn to listen, I do amazing things. So tonight I was so excited to be on this call. I got rid of my rocking chair and my moving chair. I'm in a stationary chair. I find time to sit still. I find time to be silent. I find time to listen to my breath, and I find time to listen to others. And then I just go out and raise high holy hell. But, so I'm learning how to be the best me in any given moment, and really what lever I can pull that will give me the most juice, and what has the most meaning in any given moment. And I'm basically regulated by a couple of things. I care less about the system and far more about children. So what is in the best interest of a child in any given moment is what really drives me. Not what's in the best interest of a report card. Report cards will come and go. I've been asked to graduate elsewhere. I've failed out of amazing schools. I've gotten A's. I've got a PhD. It makes very little difference. It's the relationships and trust that you build with people that allow you to create this network that give you greater fulfillment in life. And here, you're a principal. The first thing you do, you walk into a class, are the children engaged? And it's great to see kids engaged. But look, we've got kids sitting on TikTok who are engaged for 8 hours a day, basically doing nothing. I want to talk about fulfillment. I want to talk about your physical and psychological health. Are you physically well enough to be able, and are you mentally well enough to make best decisions for you? Because at the end of the day, you're going to live a life. how can you have better performance as a student and as an employee and be more effective as a teammate and a leader? And that's what purpose is all about, as opposed to transaction. So those are some of the things that I've learned along the way. But, getting back to my nutty story is that, so I get called to the principal's office and they say, Mr. Ritz, you have this big box. And I'm like, thank you, Jesus. My prayers are answered. The internet really works. Me and my AOL account, I'm going to send a letter to Al Gore. And I open up this box, and in the principal's office, I'm like a kid on Christmas. And inside of this box are these little things that look like onions. And I'm like, literally, WTF? Who would send this to me? You know who I teach. You know where I am. This is a box of projectiles. This flat out sucks. This is a poor
onions in a high school, right?
Yeah, I'm being pumped. I take this box back to class. The kids walk in. They're excited that I still have a job because they just didn't want another ATR or a day-to-day sub. I walk in, I throw the box behind the radiator, and I forget about it. Literally, behind the old radiator, underneath the window, and I forgot about it. Fast forward 6 weeks, 7 weeks later, there's a fight in class, which was not uncommon. And this little skinny kid hits a girl who's about 220 pounds with a joke about her mother right between the eyes. The whole class is laughing. This girl gets up with a head of steam. She's running across the room, and in slow motion, I hear, my career is over. I'm literally thinking this is it. The skinny little kid goes running to the other side of the room to the radiator. He sticks his hand under the radiator, and now I'm really getting nervous. We had a lot of weapons. I mean, this was before metal detectors were really even effective in school, and we were routinely pulling guns out of school. And all of a sudden, the kid reaches under the radiator, comes up with a handful of flowers, and the whole class starts laughing. And the girl who was going to literally beat him to a pulp steps back, and I'm like, flowers? WTF, this is a teachable moment. What the hell is going on here? It turns out they weren't onions. They were daffodil bulbs. And someone, the New York City Parks Department, sent me 250 daffodil bulbs asking if my students and I would like to come to a park and plant them. Lo and behold, the very park where my wife and I used to date. So, we read the box, we looked inside. The boys wanted to sell the flowers to the girls. The girls wanted to sell them. The boys wanted to give them to the girls for sex. And then, we kind of figured right then and there, we could do something with these flowers. Turns out that year, my students and I, we got really good at planting bulbs. We thought it was really cool. The principal was like, get these kids out of here. You want to go work with New York City Parks Department? Great. We planted 25,000 bulbs across New York City that fall. If you've ever been on the Cross Bronx Expressway on the West Side Highway, up and down Marshall Parkway, all those yellow daffodils you see, those were my kids in 2004. Lo and behold, we started doing other things. Mayor Bloomberg passed a water reduction act that allowed for tax abatements on roofs, and I started getting these kids jobs. And that was a game changer.
I see it. And
when you move kids to employment, it was amazing. So it got really interesting. Because, that year, Gifford Miller invited me and my students, because he heard about these amazing kids up in the Bronx that were doing, remarkable work. They invited us to come down to city council. I'm like, whoa, this is going to be interesting. Do you know who these kids really are? We all got cleaned up, and everyone thought that we were the honors program. No, we weren't the honors program. These are the exact kids you're trying to get rid of. And we were able to move a bulk of those kids into what was then being founded as Sustainable South Bronx. And, to this day, those 17 kids have all stayed out of prison. They all went on to graduate. In 2007, I gave a talk. You were talking about Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia University, called From Crack to Cucumbers. And I brought, I think, 20 young people from Harlem, Washington Heights, and the South Bronx who had been selling drugs, a variety of drugs across their communities, and got involved in the green movement, doing landscape work, environmental remediation. And, we're really making a difference in the lives of their communities, giving life to the planet, but also building a life for themselves. And that's literally how the work got started. And then I learned about food, because I didn't even know what food was. I was eating, we were getting bigger, we were making money, we were doing ornamental plants. And then the remarkable thing is the first Whole Foods opened up in New York City. And I'll never forget it. It was on, Columbus Avenue and 96th Street. Me and my gang kids go wandering into, to Whole Foods on 96th Street. And every single head in the store turned. You know, security came and looked at us. I had kids who could have farted the security guard off of us. But what happened is we got drunk on tomatoes. We saw produce. We saw plants. And then we realized that we could not only grow ornamental plants, but food. So I wrote to Whole Foods, and I want to shout them out because they gave me the opportunity to let my students sell the food that they grew in Whole Foods. And that was the beginning of a revolution.
And then you started, you brought in when we met, and I'm glad Ben Sherman is on here. Ben,
is he really?
Yeah, he's another innovative founder of an amazing school and a principal and a citywide administrator. And so we've got an interesting crew here today. And Ben, you're sort of coming in. The train has left the station, so I'm trying to catch up with Stephen because the engine is chugging away. But here is this thing where I just want to, for the folks who are listening, sometimes we think of mindfulness as the stillness and the silence. And yes, that's good, but mindful action is action. Mindful action that is connected to praxis is action that is shedding light on the structure, interrupting structures or processes or systems, interrupting. Stephen, when I listen to you, these things that happen, they interrupted from the moment the kids see that the thing that they were going to throw was a flower. You're interrupting structures, processes, systems, bringing something in, and you're going with it. And I just want to uplift that as a sign of mindful action. Mindfulness is not about becoming just a quiet, calm, obedient, compliant, appendage of somebody's corporate plan. Mindfulness is about critical awareness that as it grows becomes critical action, that is about caring for others. It can be. And I feel that's something that you've done. You've done something that you said the word sustainable. And, this is really the key thing, is that you have sustained this class. I've been there. Ben and I were there. We were there with the Green Sheik, of somebody from the United Emirates who wanted to bring, things like mindfulness and gardening, the work that you're doing. That's how we met. We were like, what are we doing here? And then we started talking to each other. Now, the thing is sustainable. You've kept this thing alive, and then you've met Jeffrey Sachs, and we have this thing called the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm just throwing this out there for our listeners, for people who will hear this. We know that we've got to find a way to live sustainably on a planet that is screaming at us right now, like Scotty in Star Trek. I can't hold it much longer. We don't have fire seasons. We have fires all year round in California. We have crises. We have things that we have got to deal with. And so the Sustainable Development Goals, and for our listeners, you can Google within an hour of the end of this conversation, you can find out and really take a look at the work. It's on YouTube, or just Google the Green Bronx Machine. You'll get all the information you want about that. Google the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of them, but there are 2 or 3 of those Sustainable Development Goals. These are international. I call them global issues. They're simultaneously local and they're global. And these are the things that, in my humble opinion, that's the purpose for our mindfulness. Somehow we've got to be able to pay attention on purpose to what arises in the present moment in relationship to things that are hard for us to look at. Inconvenient truths. That was the name of the film that Al Gore presented to us. You mentioned him earlier. How do we use mindfulness to stay focused on sustaining solutions and finding these solutions? And I feel that you sort of embody that, and you're important for this, because I think a lot of people think, well, mindfulness means that everybody's just calmly solving problems. Well,
No,
yeah,
it's not about being calm.
go
It's
ahead.
really about being focused. So, first and foremost, this work is about equity. It really is about equity, and I consider myself an equity warrior. And let me be very clear, the greatest lever that this great nation of ours has towards ending poverty, which is goal number one of the Sustainable Development Goals, is really public education. Because that, when you talk about what lever ends poverty now more than ever, when fast is really fast and slow has never been slower, public education is the greatest lever that we have to end poverty. And let me be clear, we could end poverty, we could feed the hungry and clothe the naked tomorrow. The big issue is, can we satisfy the rich? And that's a whole separate conversation. But the degree to which we resist any injustice, and I'm sure I'm not the only teacher or professional on this call that has had, their coats cut, their shirts flagged, or been called to the office or gotten a letter to file. But the degree to which we resist injustice is the degree to which we are all free. Now, this work is hard. And this is where the mindfulness comes in, because it's really hard and it requires a great deal of courage. So when you look at what the opposite of courage is, the opposite of courage is not cowardice. The opposite of courage is conformity, because even a dead fish can go with the flow. And the reality is, our students are not dead fish. We don't want them to conform. We don't want to go silently into the night. So we have to really be tactful and mindful and strategic in what we do. And remarkably, that's, I'm not really here to piss people off. I'm here to bring people together. It's remarkable that in the work that I do now, and I'll keep my politics out of the conversation, that, I think both Republicans and Democrats, no matter where I go, people really want to see children thrive and do well in school. It's how we execute on that. Now, you talked about transfer schools. I had big plans for transfer schools at the turn of the millennium. I wrote great school proposals that were approved by the Board of Ed. And where they want to put them, they wanted to put them in communities of wealth and privilege. And that's not really who I really wanted to work with then. However, now, I'll talk to anybody. But interestingly enough, the schools that I had built and designed to be implemented here in the South Bronx wound up being implemented overseas in communities of the wealthy and privileged. And, I built schools in Dubai that were literally the exact proposal that I've handed to the Board of Ed, and they were like, not now, later. And they've gone on to become top 20 schools in the world.
This is interesting just to note. This is the same kind of story that Christopher Emdin tells about his efforts.
Chris and I are good friends. I gave him a bow tie.
For folks who are not familiar with Christopher Emdin, Google him, but he's another innovative educator finding solutions that have a lot. And Christopher is a big champion of mindfulness too. And this is not some hokey pokey thing. Mindfulness is giving kids the skill set to cultivate their own sense of awareness, of attentional focus, so that they can choose. We're not telling them what they should, but giving them the ability to do that, and then that sense of being able to come back to difficult problems. Go ahead.
It's 3 words. It's belief. You started at an elementary level, giving children the ability to believe in themselves. In middle school, you give them the ability to have agency before they start making bad decisions. And then in high school, you help them to encourage and develop their identity, who they are. That's purpose, and everything else falls into place. I really believe strongly in that. And the bottom line is this. We are in a system where we champion 2% gains. 2% to me is so ridiculous. No child rises to low expectations. And for far too long, we have had far too low expectations in the communities that need it the most. And what are we finding is that the greatest natural resource in the world is the untapped potential in communities just like mine. But similarly, and this is fascinating, I've done work, overseas in Abu Dhabi, where I've had 8th graders of very wealthy children raise $1 million for communities in Africa out of their allowance. So we've taken children of privilege. I've never seen $1 million. I don't have $1 million, but I have access to children who have parents who do. And the crazy thing is, private schools dedicated to public service can have a 2-for-1 effect or a 3-for-1 effect that is absolutely mind-numbing. So I've literally, through the power of the internet, been able to connect children and communities around the world, where literally I have children in Abu Dhabi who are building schools, sending sanitation, raising $1 million a year for communities in Africa. And then they get to go and visit these communities, and they're building personal and professional resume while really working to change the world. So that's what this work to me is all about.
Incredible. I feel very humbled and inspired. I'm keeping my eye on the clock. I know that we have to end soon. We wanted to give a slice to our listeners. We also wanted to begin to cultivate an opportunity to look more deeply into what wants to be. In this conversation, we've got almost the DNA strand for a whole university course in and of itself, and that's the kind of thing that I feel also needs to happen. We've got to hold the spaces to have these kinds of conversations. And so I just want to express a lot of gratitude to Tracy and the leadership of the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully, because we're having this conversation in a kind of fishbowl. And you folks who are here tonight, even though we see some faces, we see the names, we have a sense of you holding the space. That's a mindfulness practice too, paying attention while we hash this out, because we need to understand and regenerate a sense of purpose around this work, no matter where we are. My interest in mindfulness are lifting me up past just working with kids. I want to work with people in think tanks and people who are really having a hard time being together. And look at the world. We have world leaders who can't even sit in rooms together. They don't even know how to follow their own breath and regulate themselves. So this is a critical thing. I was honored to be invited to speak to a very high level high school in Florida, very smart kids, all brilliant and very privileged, beautiful children, an excellent school, best values. And it was reminding me of something that Christopher Emdin said when he went and saw this at a school in California, and they were completely implementing his model for liberation pedagogy and really dynamic teaching. And he said, it was all there. The only difference between what was happening there and for schools in New York City for some was that those kids were free. They were free, a sense of freedom. And it really comes down to educators like you and Tracy, people like you, and parents. Tracy came to me as a parent who wanted to bring mindfulness into the Midwest. And so she started the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. But I see people like you, Stephen, and Ben, and Jane Marie. This is going to continue. Everything. The Coalition of Schools is going to continue. The Green Bronx Machine is going to continue, caring, innovative schools. But it's going to be people who create the dynamics for the things to happen. I wanted to say that, I challenged those kids when I visited them, to think of what needs to happen in the world so that children like the kids that I work with can have the same kinds of opportunities that they have. And those kids took me seriously. People don't wake up in the morning saying, oh, I just think I want to put my boot in the face of people who don't have what I have. These kids want to find solutions too. I find great hope in this conversation this evening. And I find great hope in any kids who we authentically show up for, from any walk of life, and I'm just grateful to be here. We could have this conversation all night. I know Tracy has captured this. We'll look back at it. Stephen, I just want to thank you so much for giving us the time. And we will do good by you by circling back and telling the story even of this conversation. Tracy, was there anything you wanted to let folks know? This, just so you know, this is part of a course. You can go, and Tracy, maybe you can tell folks how they can access this and get and see the other talks, but go ahead.
Yeah, I put in the chat the link to learn about our annual conference for this year. We just finalized the presenters, so you can go to that link and see, you know, some of the topics we're going to be covering this year. But we use Mighty Networks as a community building platform so that we can be sharing and learning together all year long. And it has a view trackable area, kind of like Teachable, where we put all the past recordings of our events, of our conference sessions, so that teachers can earn their clock hours and learn kind of on demand at their own pace as well. Because we know we don't always want to, on a weekday evening after a long day of school, be popping on Zoom. So we try to make it accessible for everyone to learn about mindfulness concepts and be inspired by awesome teachers like Stephen. So thank you, Stephen, for joining us tonight.
No, thank you, everybody. I urge each and every one of you simply to do something that you and your future self will thank you for. That's what this work is all about. I'll share with you in closing one quick thing. I was very blessed and privileged yesterday to spend the day with Jane Goodall, who at 88 years of age has more energy and more zest than I do. And we spent a lot of time talking about this word called hope. And, you know, hope is not wishful thinking. I can hope that I will have a full head of hair, but that's probably more rooted in wishful thinking. However, hope is action. And I can take care of the hair that I have so that I wind up having more of it into the future for a longer period of time. So hope is rooted in action. And, you know, I was blessed to see a friend of mine, Rhonda Hubbard, on this call, who gave me a shirt that my kids love, and it's called Hope Dealer. And I think that's really what we are, because if we can give children hope and connect them to purpose, you know, there's YouTube and the public library for everything else. So let's stay out of their way. And let's just help them get there more frequently. On that note, you know, you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start in order to be great.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, everybody. Why don't we just take one nice breath? Just breathe. Take a nice, good pause for one big inhale and one exhale. We'll be doing another talk in a month. And all I have is gratitude. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening and keep coming back. Let's come back to the conversation. Have a good night.
Thanks kindly. Thank you for having me. Goodbye. Good night to all.
Good night.